and gentlemen, dear doctors, thank you for joining our webinar powered by Informa. This webinar is entitled Early Detection of Hematological Cell Deviations is Now Possible. And this is being a possibility with our new high-volume hematology analyzers. An evident learning in the evolution of the biomarkers related to these analyzers is the clinical utility of the monocyte distribution width, or MDW, as a marker to aid in identifying the severity of infection. Let us welcome our renowned speaker, namely Professor Muhammad Qari. Professor Qari is a consultant and a professor of hematology. He is the chairman of King Abdulaziz University Hospital Hematology Department in Jeddah. He is the president and founder of the Pan-Arab Hematology Association and the president of the Saudi Hematology Society. Professor Qari has 3 issued patents in his name and around 100 publication and research articles around the hematology parameters in various disease patterns and the blood transfusion and smoking risk, to name the less. The floor is yours, Professor Qari.
Thank you very much, Grace. It's a great opportunity to be on board with you and colleagues. This is another opportunity for me to thank Beckman Coulter for having continuing medical education program showing the latest in the technology, and this is one of them. Today, I talk to you about monocyte distribution width and the high volume or high throughput analyzers. It's incomplete without showing a picture of Wallace Coulter, an electrical engineer, an inventor, and a businessman. Wallace Coulter lived between 1913 and 1998. He is behind the invention of the Coulter principle. It provides a method to measure very small, tiny particles in solution. And this was what was the principle used in complete blood count, where you count cells in solution to give rise to complete blood count or CBC. It's also in the quality control of consumer products like chocolate, beer, paints, and other products where tiny particle has to be counted. So it's a great invention working until this moment. This is the first machine used by Wallace Coulter when he invented this principle. The idea was simple and smart at the same time. You have blood being passed from one chamber to another, inner chamber and outer chamber. There are 2 electrodes, and every time a cell passes through the small aperture here, it will impede or resist the electric current transmission, giving rise to an impulse generated and giving a count of 1 cell. So when you run a standardized solution or complete blood count, you do this in solution where every cell passes is counted, and then you end up having a count of all the cells and their volume. This later gave rise after 40 years or to 50 years to the modular system, which is high-tech machine that does many samples, more than 300 samples per hour. And each time we analyze to produce results within a very short time. Normally for each CBC, it takes less than a minute for the machine to do. If properly used, they produce precise and accurate results, significantly increasing the number of patients to be served, making efficient the use of the laboratory resources. So normally what does automated analyzer perform? They count the white cells, the red cells, and the platelets. They measure the hemoglobin and calculate from these values, which we call them absolute values, we calculate hematological indices, means cell volume, hematocrit, and other things related to the complete blood count. We can perform 5-part differential, which are differential of the white cells to 5 subclasses, indicate abnormalities of red cells, platelets, and white cells. This will show on your machine as flagged if there is abnormal count of each of these. CBC performed on automated analyzer requires a well-mixed EDTA sample, and CBC is a group of tests, not only one test. There is about 18 parameters that you can see in your complete blood count report. Tests are performed simultaneously. That means for the 18 parameters, they are not done one after the other. They are done simultaneously, and the whole parameters are released in less than a minute. When performance limits of automated analyzer exceeded, blood smear review must happen, and this is reflected as a flag from the machine telling you that this is a specimen that requires blood examination. One of the interesting advances that such a machine will give 93% first pass yield. That means you get confidence in the results in 93%, including accuracy and precision within acceptable limits, without extra mode, without extra reagents. And you are analyzing cells in their normal, natural, near native states, without having to add any stain, without having to change anything in the normal constitution of the cells. We can also do extended white cell count and extended platelet count and perform triplicate counting of the white cells, red cells, and the platelets. Let's look later at what is the triplicate count. Before we move into triplicate counting, let me explain what is the volume conductivity scatter technology. In this principle, which Wallace Coulter put, he measures the volume of the cell through passing a current in the aperture, and then we can measure the conductivity that will give us a clue on the nuclear cytoplasmic ratio and the nuclear volume. And then finally, we have the light scatter, which is laser light being shed at individual cells passing through in focus front of the laser light. So the cell surface characteristics of the white cells will define which type of cell, and I will show you that in the next. Now, volume study is measured through direct current in the aperture. We will pass a direct current, and amount of the impedance of the current will be relative to the volume of the cell. We will also pass alternate current, which will look at the conductivity or radio frequency, and that is going to tell us much about the constituent of individual cells. And finally, we have the light scatter. The light scatter of the laser hitting individual white cells will give us a reflection or scatter of the laser light when it hits individual cells. So this will simply measure their number, their size, and their constituents and their cell surface characteristics through what we call forward scatter, which is mostly a cinematographic appearance on the size of the cell. And secondly, the side scatter, because laser light, when it hits something more solid than air, it will reflect to the side, and this is collected on the photomultiplier tubes. And again, volume, conductivity, and scatter will be put in a graph which is three-dimensional, putting the size on one side, the conductivity on the other side, and the light scatter on the other side. The more granular the cell, the more the side scatter. And now, if you put the three-dimensional graph all together, you will be able, in this particular 3D graph, to see 5 subclasses of white cells, depending on the volume, the contents, and the granularity and the cell surface. So these three together are called DCS technology, are part of the system. The electric impedance principle utilizes non-conductive properties of the whites of the cells, because each blood cell is resistant to passing the electric current. As it will pass through the orifice or the aperture, it will displace the volume and will increase resistance between the two electrodes we have between the inner chamber and the outer chamber. Red cells and platelets counted together, separated by pulse height, because red cell and platelet will have the same electrical impedance characteristics, but one is larger, which is the red cell, one is smaller, which is the platelet, so this will be reflected as height of the impulse. Hydrodynamic focusing forces cell to pass individually through the aperture. And then the optical detection principle, using the laser light, diluted blood specimen will go facing a beam of focused laser. As each cell passes through the sensing zone of the laser, It will scatter the focused light. The scattered light, either forward scatter or side scatter, will be read by photo multiplier tubes and converted into electrical pulse correlating to its size. Number of the pulse generated is directly proportional to the number and the surface feature. So this is a reliable and reportable white cell differential because in this case we will have cells being analyzed in the near native state, and there are no stains involved. Cells are analyzed in their normal natural status, and the extended count it can be done if we have a very low white cell count or very low count leukopenia. We can extend it to 50,000 cells by increasing the time frame of the testing. For high white cell samples like leukocytosis, we need to autocorrect for that by diluting the sample further. All these processes are carried out automatically by the equipment. No human intervention. The triplicate count, which I discussed earlier, is measuring each of the parameters that you have on the top here: red cells, platelet, white cells. All of them are done through 3 apertures at the same time, simultaneously. You don't have to wait for an aperture to finish. You will do them in one time, and this will give us more accurate and more precise testing because the machine will do 3 aperture count and will take the average and will report the average, deleting the outlier results. To see how accurate the machine that I show you, DXH-V4, which is the Beckman Coulter equipment, it has least number of flags compared to the competitor. That means this machine will autocorrect automatically for any abnormality and will be able to report accurately and precisely the results, less flags than in the other machine, which can be disturbed due to the smallest deviation from normal. So confidence in this kind of equipment is reasonably high. And then finally, a word about the quality assurance. You have a quality assurance program that runs between intralaboratory, and interlaboratory. That means you can compare with your own results, with your own control, and with other laboratories from outside. Let's move now to monocyte distribution width. Monocyte distribution width is the test that we take that we are done to measure the variation of the size of the monocytes, and we know that monocytes are part of the innate immune system, and they are at the same time early responders to infection and response to all pathogen, whether bacteria, virus, or fungi. This will result in change in the volume of the monocytes. That means if the patient has an infection, his monocyte sizes will be variable. They will be variable sizes. And this is reflected as monocyte distribution width being increased or high coefficient of variation, because MDW in itself is a statistical value which is coefficient of variation of the sizes of the monocytes, which will happen obviously. The DXH technology allows for precise measurement of these changes in the volume. This is what you're going to see on the graph. In a normal instances, you will see the green area here showing normal distribution width of the monocytes. They are very much similar in size. While in case of an infection, we will see the sizes being put on the y-axis here because we have variable sizes, and this will indicate an infection going on. Diagnostic uncertainty is a problem if you are in an emergency room and you are dealing with sepsis. It will happen very often that patients come with very early sepsis with signs of an infection, but not very overt, so he may be delayed in diagnosis and treatment because over 30% of septic shock patients present with vague symptoms. And the signs is most frequently misdiagnosed, and this is misdiagnosis due to either cognitive factor from the treating physician, or process insufficiencies or high workload in a small minor. The initial discharge of patients with potential sepsis results in twice more mortality and 4 times more health care cost per patient. So how do we avoid that? We can contribute to avoiding this loss by early sepsis indicator, which is the monocyte distribution width, which is tested for in whole blood within 2 hours of collection. MDW results greater than 20. If it is combined with the clinical and laboratory finding, it will aid in identifying sepsis early within the first 12 hours of hospitalization. The CBC result, this is what you're going to see. Monocyte distribution width will be reported automatically as part of your complete blood count without any extra. Some of the scientific studies looked at the MDW. Is this study carried out in Sorbonne University in France? It is looking at monocyte distribution acting as an early indicator in the emergency room, comparing with CRP and procalcitonin. We have seen here that we have sepsis 2 criteria, sepsis 3 criteria. The sepsis 2 and 3 criteria are terminologies used by infectious disease physicians if they are using to define the sepsis by 2 criteria, for example, fever and tachycardia, or 3 criteria, for example, fever, tachycardia, and tachypnea. Those are 2 and 3 criteria that you are going to use in this study. So let's see the results. If you use the white cells as an indicator of infection, you will see that will cover sensitivity of 0.75%. If you use monocyte distribution width, it will cover 0.79 sensitivity of detecting infection. But if you combine MDW and white cells, you increase significantly sensitivity into 0.85. So MDW plus the white cells are very efficient in detecting early infections. Same thing, if you do the box plot here, you will see that if you use sepsis 3 criteria, if a normal individual who have something below 20 level of the MDW, this indicates normal case control. And once the patient has an early infection, his MDW will be, without any overlap with the normal, will be above 20. And of course, even higher if there are sepsis or if there is septic shock, which is going to show us the highest MDW. Same thing, but less clear if you do sepsis 2 criteria, but once an infection is there, we don't see much of overlap between normal and infection. Sometimes there is an overlap if we look at serious inflammatory response indicators. Now, if you do a comparison with procalcitonin and C-reactive protein, we can see clearly that if you use sepsis 2 criteria, MDW and white cell count show us the highest sensitivity in this particular study and almost equivalent sensitivity in sepsis 3 studies because we are using one more clinical criteria. So, and this is another study which is multi-center. MDW enhances early sepsis detection in emergency room beyond serious inflammatory response measures. And so far, those are terminology used by the infectious disease physicians. Again, here, when you look at sensitivity, you can see that white cell count and MDW show us the high sensitivity much more than individual clinical features of sepsis. And you can also use MDW in the opposite direction to rule out an infection, because in a patient who does not have an infection, we will definitely have a normal MDW. This by itself is enough to rule out sepsis. You can see here we have very good confidence of 92.7% of MDW and 92.3 levels, telling that if the MDW is negative, you can rule out sepsis. And this is in the relation to their negative predictive value of the MDW. So it can be used both ways, either a sensitive indicator of sepsis when it is more than 20, or negative if it is less than 20. But if you combine the MDW with tachycardia or tachypnea or temperature, of course, if you use white cells and MDW, they are negative, then this tells us that the probability of an infection is very low. With the MDW and white cells shown in purple, they are very low sensitivity if you have low MDW and low white cells. If we have high both MDW and white cells, we get the highest probability in case of tachycardia plus those two, tachypnea plus both of them, or tachycardia plus tachypnea or fever. So if we combine MDW, white cells, and one or two of the sepsis definition criteria, they are enough to give us very confident and accurate and precise ability to suspect infection and take the patient to next level of care. This is another study showing MDW as a useful biomarker to improve early sepsis management in emergency room. And this concluded that MDW can predict sepsis, increasing the clinical value of leukocyte 5-part differential and supporting the clinical decision-making in sepsis management at admission to emergency room. So every time you admit a patient, you need confidently to discharge or admit patient based on either ruling in or ruling out the infection. Another interesting study, this is a meta-analysis study which included 10 clinical trials being put under the table for further analysis. Some of them were prospective, some others were retrospective studies. But the good thing is that here, if you look at the sensitivity seen in all the studies, you can see that the numbers are so close together, giving us more confidence that sensitivity is reproducible and precise among all the studies, and it is the best to sensitive indicator of sepsis. Again, the same thing, very similar numbers when you use MDW as a negative predictive marker for absence of sepsis. When you see that 90 something there, that will tell you that there's no infection if you have MDW below 20. So again, you can use MDW as sensitive indicator of infection, and if it is normal, it is a good sensitive indicator that the patient has no infection. In summary, principal conclusion of this study was MDW could represent a reliable tool for guiding clinician in the appropriate management of patients. Also, when sepsis is not suspected, it is again reported. An altered MDW value should be interpreted as red flag for sepsis, and the clinician should monitor the patient and further investigate to confirm the suspicion of sepsis. Also, due to the high negative predictive value of 90 plus, MDW below the cutoff level should be able to enable us to exclude sepsis with high reliability. This is my last slide. MDW is a biomarker. It is the only proprietary FDA-cleared hematological biomarker exclusive to Beckman-Coulter analyzers. It will help to establish severity of infection and risk of sepsis in adult patients in emergency room. MDW will help reducing uncertainty available early to help clinician escalate or de-escalate care in patients with suspected infection. MDW is available early in patient assessment as part of the complete blood count with differential test, and no need to order any additional test. This test is done as part of the differential without extra cost, without extra stains or reagents, so it is just part of your complete blood count, and it is peculiar to Beckman-Coulter who released this technology in their PXH mission. Thank you very much. I would like to thank Beckman-Coulter for giving me this opportunity to show the latest in their technology. Look forward to
Thank you very much, Professor Kari. If you please, yes, stop sharing. We need to see your lovely face.
Thank you very much.
Professor Kari, we have so far 3 questions. The first question
Yes.
says, you mentioned that the VCS technology is able to give 93% first pass result. And the reason behind that is near native status. Can you explain further how this is possible and what do you mean by near native status?
Okay, in this technology, samples are analyzed in a solution which contains EDTA. You don't need to add any stain. You don't need to add any reagent. Blood is analyzed in its own natural, normal status as if it is in the physiological state. So there is no reagents and no solutions added for any adjustment, just near native state. So that will give you more confidence and first pass yield.
Okay. The second question says, if we don't have the MDW parameter in our CBC instruments, can we use IG, immature granulocytes, to predict sepsis as an alternative solution for MDW?
Okay. The immature granulocytes can be part of several other disorders. For example, chronic myeloproliferative disease, which are so common and very commonly seen, may be there because without any infection. Patient with steroid treatment, and there are millions of the individuals over the world on steroid treatment, they will have immature granulocytes. So I think that gives us less confidence in using immature granulocyte as an indicator of sepsis, because it is non-specific. It can be part of many differential diagnoses. But the monocyte sizes or distribution width, or I call it coefficient of variation, because MDW in itself is a statistical measure or coefficient of variation calculated for the size of the monocytes. If you have variable monocyte sizes, then we are dealing with an infection very likely. More sensitivity and more specificity than the immature granulocytes.
Okay, one more question. Is it good to combine MDW with PCT as early sepsis indicators? Do you have an experience around that?
Yeah. No, I don't have an experience with that, but I think it's very good to add parameters of the clinical signs like tachycardia, tachypnea, and fever. Those are customary in the studies. They have been studied along with MDW and white cell count as an indicator of an infection. When there are a comparison with procalcitonin and CRB, we have seen in the study I displayed that MDW is more sensitive than those parameters.
Okay. There's a person who says that TIFMIC already has as well the MDW for early sepsis detection, but for your info, Mr. Muhammad Khan, we have FDA approval for MDW, and we are the only ones who have FDA approval for MDW. Do you need to comment on that, Professor Kari?
To my knowledge, I think the only owner of this invention or patent is Beckman Coulter. And if someone else does that, I think it's going to be something else. It's not MDW, which is studied very well in the clinical trials. So I don't think MDW is owned by anyone else. I think it's peculiar to Beckman Coulter.
Thank you. No further questions. Someone asked if there will be certificates. If you want certificates, please connect with us and we will share a certificate with you. Thanks a lot, Professor Kari, for your time and for really sharing your knowledge. We value everything you did for us throughout this experience, and we thank you a lot. And hopefully our hematology analyzers will shape the future of hematology in the near future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Grace, and I look forward to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.